Hi, good morning. Wow, that's very loud. Okay, sorry. Got my morning voice on too. So, hi, I'm Michelle Bird. I'm the Associate National Executive Director, Producers Guild. It's very nice. I should just have Chris follow me everywhere I go, because there's always some nice applause. So, thank you. First, I'd like to thank Fox Studio Operations for hosting us on this fantastic lot. It's been great. We had a great first day yesterday. Looking forward to today. And I'd like to thank our sponsors and friends for this session, which is Artificial Intelligence Demystified. And I'm thanking Microsoft and NVIDIA for sponsorship of this session, so thank you very much. As a courtesy to our speakers, please remember to keep your phones off. Please do keep your masks on. We're asking for, other than the speakers, we're asking for everybody indoors to please keep their masks on. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator and PGA member, Lori Schwartz, who is CEO and founder of Storytech. So Lori?
Actually just going to bring up all the panelists, if you guys can come on up, and we're going to do a little intro. Now, while they're taking their seats, how many of you have any exposure or sort of experience around artificial intelligence in media and entertainment? Just raise your hand. Okay, so a few of you, great. We're going to do a little, elementary discussion about it, since the majority of you don't, and then we'll upscale as the conversation goes on. But what we want to do is really break down the pieces of what's happening with AI in media and entertainment. And so to my left is Rick, and Rick is head of global media and entertainment industry strategy and marketing for NVIDIA. And you may know NVIDIA as a gaming card company that's powering maybe your own gaming stations or your kids. But they really are an AI company, and we're going to get to the root of how they're powering this world, and you saw some of that in the video. And next we have Joel, and Joel is Senior Program Manager for Microsoft Azure, or Azure, depending on your mood that morning. And Microsoft, of course, we all know, is a software company, but the discussions we're going to have today are about their Azure platform. It's a cloud platform, and it's really massive data centers empowering the cloud scalability. So we're going to talk about that. So Joel, in this case, is representing cloud. And then at the end is Nikola, and Nikola is going to has a new company, Wonder Dynamics, and they have an AI platform that is really going to be helping with the film production pipeline. So we're going to see how, adding Rick plus Joel equals Nikola. And that's a good, simple way to sort of help you guys wrap your heads around all of this. So let's start with Rick to really give us the background about what's happening in M&E with AI.
Although I don't know how the genetics work with that.
Yeah, that doesn't pan out.
Yeah,
that's
another panel.
We all know that.
That's another panel.
Another panel. Yeah, so there's a lot happening with artificial intelligence in media and entertainment. A lot of films today are actually using it. Most films, in fact, at this point. So we'll talk about some of that on the content creation side, but there's also a lot of things happening in distribution, content monetization, and even on the consumer side. AI, just in general, for those of you who aren't too familiar with some of the different levels that we're talking about here. So AI, a lot of people generally think about it in terms of, computers doing human level things. So, at the level of human cognition. And so it's a pretty broad term, and we use it interchangeably for other things like machine intelligence and deep learning. Or machine learning rather than deep learning. And so, but machine learning and deep learning are subsets of AI. And you can think of machine learning really as the tools, the process, the practice of achieving AI. And so some of the things in the early days like spam filters and those sorts of things are very specific and human guided. And but then we're now doing a lot of things with deep learning, which is more of like you've heard of neural networks, which kind of simulate to a certain degree or resemble human neurons in the brain. And so you could think of them as like these networks, and they have nodes, and there are different layers, and they're called deep neural networks because you go down the layers, and some of these networks are pretty massive with lots of layers. And so basically you can feed something into the top of this neural network, and these nodes are processing and have different weights. So for example, You all know what a cat looks like. And the reason you know that is because your parents early on showed you lots of pictures of cats. You saw real cats. And then, maybe the first time you saw a raccoon, you might have thought that was a cat too. But then over time, you see so much that you're able to now infer when you see a cat that it is indeed a cat. And so, and similarly with a neural network, you have to train it first. So you may have a database with loads and loads of images, and we'll give you lots of other examples of how AI is being used. And you train it to know what a cat is, and then you run inference later, so you give it a new photo of a cat that it's never seen before, but it's able to infer that it is a cat because of these nodes and layers with all the weightings, and it says, oh yeah, it's got pointy ears, it has whiskers, it has a long tail, it's furry, it has these cute little paws, little pads, and then it can infer that it is a cat. So that's an example of a deep neural network, but we'll talk about other examples.
Great. And it's like almost sending like your husband to the supermarket and they know what products you like, if that's a good example. Does everyone get that? All right. All right, we'll bump over to Joel. Joel, talk to us about the cloud and the role that it's having in all of this, because cloud means a lot to a lot of different people.
Sure. So to bridge from AI to cloud, I think there are a couple of avenues for that. For me personally, decades and decades ago, studying very early on artificial intelligence and theorizing about how some of these things are possible, it's awesome to see that these things actually work now and you can actually do it. So I suppose first I should dispel a couple of myths about what cloud really is. From a consumer level, people think of, it's photo storage from their phone, or it's places where you're getting some. Well, it's mostly just storage. That's what people think cloud is. But it's obviously, much, much more than that. Yes, there are gigantic physical data centers all around the world, and that gives you, global scale, global collaboration. And content creation is very important because it's what's going to stitch together people all over the world that are creating the same content. You're all on a production, you're doing remote editing, visual effects, you're doing contribution and access to content that's in storage. And there's all of the infrastructure that goes into delivering that, into supporting the artist tools and the management tools that you use for doing production. And that's enabled at the massive scale and at the global interconnectedness through the cloud. And studios are doing this today. You've got smaller production companies that will do things like burst rendering to the cloud, and what that means is that they have a render farm in their shop, and that's how they're doing some of their visual effects or their animation. But now with the needs just of the scale of content that is being done, a single studio has hundreds of shows in their pipeline at the same time, or the level of quality that is needed is way higher. It's not HD anymore, it's 4K, it might even be 8K. You're doing immersive media, and what you have on site cannot do that. Even with the best of intentions, you can't afford enough machines to be able to create that content. But the cloud can, because you can scale as far as your heart's desire, as long as your credit card doesn't max out, and the tools are there to support it. And that's where AI comes in, is that now creating that content, again, just at the sheer amount that's being created, you don't have enough artists to be able to do it. So being able to leverage tools that will do everything from simple denoising of animated the renders coming off of the system, to creating characters and creating massive numbers of characters in a CG scene. It's cloud that makes that possible, and it's the GPUs that then deliver that in real time.
Just explain what GPU is, and also noise, just so people understand in case they don't know those terms.
Well, let's ask
the GPU
NVIDIA guy about a GPU then.
just so you could set the stage for folks.
Yeah, and so Lori kind of said at the beginning, a lot of you know GPUs as graphics cards, and so that's what you plug your monitor into. You may plug in projectors and VR headsets, but there are graphics processing units, and they're massively parallel processing units. So you all know of CPUs, and they have tens of cores, 8 core, 12 core, 64 core now. GPUs have like 10,000 cores. And so they can process things very quickly and in parallel. And so when you think of like AI, that's why they're particularly good at doing that and particularly fast. And then scaling across rendering. So Joel was talking about denoising. Well, when you're ray tracing something, so light, bounces off of things in a 3D scene. So light is bouncing off of us, and then it returns to your eye, and that's how you see it. And rays are bouncing between us, and all of these light rays are going all over the place. With ray tracing for 3D, that's what's happening. So, but it has to resolve over time because the lights are bouncing so fast and it has to all get processed. And so when you're first seeing a render happening in real time or in near real time, you're seeing lots of noise, which is basically just the pixels that have finished processing and have returned to the screen, and now you're seeing it. And until they've all resolved, you see a noisy image. Well, with AI, you can invent everything that happens in between those, basically, so you see a full image before it's resolved. That's an approximation of what the final image will be. And then as it resolves, it still gets clearer and clearer, but at least you can make a creative decision much faster. And that's just for offline processing. This is the kind of thing that you would see in a film, but a lot's happening in real time now, and AI helps with that too.
That's great. Thank you for that, Rick. Rick is so good to just call up, and every time you talk to him, he opens your brain up more. All right, let's go over.
We'll put
yes, please, Joel.
his phone number on the
Yes,
screen.
I have it, so just come to me. Let's go over to Nikola. And Nikola, you have a company now, Wonder Dynamics, and you're really leveraging what these two guys are to create a platform that's actually going to help content creators leverage these tools. So talk to us about what you're doing.
Yeah, I think for us, the focus and what we've seen in AI is really this kind of, we say, what we saw in 90s with CG, that's what AI is going to be in 2020. And for us, the focus is really building tools. We're building this platform to essentially enable independent artists, independent filmmakers to create CG-heavy, visual effects-heavy content on an indie budget. So really, what we've seen in AI is to simplify something that's really complex. These pipelines are really complex. That's why you have these movies cost $100, $200 million. So we really saw this huge opportunity on streamlining that process. And what I think is really important, enabling artists that, are good storytellers, but they're not technically really savvy. And a lot of these 3D softwares are extremely complicated. So that simplicity is really what gets you to be more creative. So you don't have to have that learning curve. I come from visual effects. I spent about 12 years in visual effects, and I was always so frustrated about, as a storyteller, you get in this industry because you want to tell stories. But then you get in visual effects and you're one out of 2,000 people that's doing some manual labor, right? No creativity whatsoever. So for us, it was really exciting to see that because we think it really gets rid of that objective and leaves the artist with subjective. So we're really excited about what's coming with AI in general. And we started it more as a curiosity of, learning what the future of filmmaking is going to be. And then once we saw the possibility, because me and my co-founder, Ty Sheridan, we wanted to make sci-fi films. And then whenever we write something, we realized, okay, this would be $100 million. So there's no way we get funding for this. And then we started playing with AI. This is about early 2018. And then we realized this is doable and this is possible. And the shift that AI is going to make, in my humble opinion, in the film industry is going to be way bigger than people realize. And to add, what NVIDIA is doing, obviously we're running on their graphic cards. And I think on cloud, the beauty of cloud is that it enables people that cannot afford these machines, right? Because they're heavy machines. But then you're going to have startups like ours that are going to put stuff as a web platform that's running in cloud, and it's not going to be that expensive. You're going to have monthly subscription or even free. A lot of companies are doing a lot of free stuff. And then the company takes the cloud expense, and the company is covering, these heavy machines that usually now, big production companies, big VFX companies can afford. So I think that democratization of content is something that AI is going to bring us closer to.
That's great. And we are going to have time for Q&A, so just be thinking about whatever questions come to you because these guys are so fabulous. Before we get into sort of examples across the production pipeline, just so everyone here knows, you guys are probably all starting to see new roles on the network and studio side that are set up to embrace what you're doing. Can you talk a little bit spontaneously just about what some of those roles are, or who are the people you're dealing with on the studio network side? You know, head of cloud strategy or things like that. What are some of these people that are emerging?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a dichotomy because when you look at a smaller production house versus a studio, it's a very different set of people. It's a very different skill set. At a large studio, they have a corporate IT organization. If it's, any one of the big five, or they keep consolidating big four now, there's corporate IT who does all of their back end systems. So it's their payroll, it's their management tools, everything else for operational aspects. That doesn't really bleed over into the production side so much. They might try to raise that hammer to say these are the systems that you need to use, and then production says, okay, yeah, fine, and they go and they build their own. And as you start walking that down to even larger productions, so maybe it's a superhero film, but they're still rolling a lot of their own infrastructure, and maybe that particular sub studio of the bigger brand has some cloud infrastructure, and now you're getting some more specialized roles and people who are learning cloud, and they're taking the general IT expertise and turning that towards being able to support production technology. But it's still, they have expertise. They have an IT background, or they might be coming from the higher tech parts of production pipelines, and that so their role is being defined as a cloud architect or as a security specialist, or it's the more tech savvy people that pick up the roles of being a cloud infrastructure specialist that you see in the bigger productions. Scale that all the way down, of course, to indie or to smaller production shops that deliver to the big studios on those superhero films. They don't have any of that expertise. They know how to use the tools that they're familiar with, but they don't have a corporate security person. They don't have a cloud architect. They don't have an archivist. So these roles need to be filled. Because unfortunately, a certain amount of the technology is still, it's complex. There's no way around it. But we have to start turning to partners who, will come in and build and manage that for you. It's sort of like, you're going to get the studio production IT capability, but you don't have to retrain your production assistant or your lead talent. It's like we need you to go in and actually manage our content library. That's not going to work. So the roles as they're getting defined are also changing in real time. Just because of the technology that is being brought to bear. I don't know if that answered.
Yeah, no, that's great. Did you want to answer as well?
I would just say, yeah, there's still very undefined roles. When we're first starting, because our company is split between machine learning, deep learning engineers on one side, and then CG and VFX artists on the other side. And they really need to work together to understand, what the process is, right? So it was really hard at the beginning to even find the people that understand both. If they understand CG, they don't really maybe know computer vision as much, and they definitely don't know deep learning, right? So I think we're going towards the, I always say this AI where we are at stage is really similar to first .com, stages when people were worried about their jobs, but then it created so many new positions, right, that didn't exist, and now we can't even think about, now working on our computers. So I think similar is going to happen. I've been seeing a lot of these, kind of AI or machine learning artists, people that are really understanding and they know a little bit of coding, and then they can go and improve some models. So I think we don't know yet what that's going to be, but it's definitely a merge. We've been seeing a lot more intersection between technology and entertainment.
Yeah, and again, just as an example, the reason that I called my company Storytech was because I saw those two worlds coming together, and you need someone to help, mitigate it. So, Rick, you also are dealing with
Yeah.
network executives?
There are so many new roles being created, and you just heard about some of them. Of course, there's still, your CTO and, looking into the future, your CIO, your VP of infrastructure, your IT department, artists who are collecting data specifically for the purpose of creating a neural network that will do something novel. And so there are lots of people who are just collecting data at this point. There are also people who are looking towards analytics. So if you're a studio, you may want to do box office predictions. If you're producing, you may want to also have some AI that's helping you plan your schedule, or estimating costs. If you are a content creator, you may have engineers, R&D people, the SciTech Oscar winners out there, who are creating new things for the production pipeline. If you're a streamer, you may want to have recommender systems, so you have people who are specifically designing these recommender systems using different algorithms or AIs to help create better predictions for what you may want to watch, based on things like people like you also watched, or things that you've watched in the past, or the weather outside is kind of gloomy in your area, so let's give you something that you may like but is also suited to weather patterns. You could do anything like that. But so there are all these different types of AIs now, and roles that are being created to support all of that.
Joel?
Well, so yeah, let's talk a little bit about the role of data in production. So, one very real use case is image recognition, facial recognition, audio capture. So you've got, speech to text. There's a huge amount of information that comes from the camera, both, data off the camera in the form of images. Fine, got to have that. But everything else about that scene, the lighting, the camera settings, the lens settings, who's who's on the stage at that, particular moment, who's doing what, where, when, and all of that is captured by the camera, and it's associated with the systems that are then going to be used to to encode it and to put it into your daily system, and you want all of that data to actually flow with that scene that you have just captured. And so that's the role of AI in the cloud, is to take that and make an understanding and relate that information to the other information, and what was captured the day before, what's in your archive from the prequel that you did, right? No, you would have to be working on the sequel, so then the original one that is in a content library, in an archive somewhere. So you have a scene. We see you get this a lot in news broadcast, because they've got in sports decades worth of content. And you need to pull up, Michael Jordan making the same shot that LeBron James just made, and you have to be able to find that in your archive. You use AI to do that, because you've created the data that goes along with that file that says, oh, my gigantic database of 5 million people knows how to identify Michael Jordan. It'll scan through the library, find the clip that you want, excuse me, that you want of him, and then instantly recall it for the reel that you're trying to to show at the same time. And the same thing applies to finding shots, finding 3D assets. That once they've been brought into the cloud and they've been filed through these recognizers, you can say, I remember this bit of B-roll that we have that I need to stitch into my scene, or let's go back to the take from 3 weeks ago. Maybe there's something that that we can still use from that. It's all AI driven, because you've run it through the speech to text, you've run it through the image recognition, combining it with the camera data, and lets you index it and bring it all back, the moment that you need it. Vastly simplifies, having to go to an archivist at the studio and say, well, I kind of know when this was done, and here's a couple of people that are in it. Think you could find that, find that piece of film for me? 6 months later, you might actually get it. But AI then makes that just instantaneous.
Let's talk a little bit more about this pipeline and more examples, because I think that helps everyone sort of land this. And Nikola, maybe you could tell us, and I know you're just launching, but a case study for how someone would come and use your platform to help their production.
Right. I think we're still, in a bit of a stealth mode, but we're launching end of the year. But our focus.
You're not in stealth anymore.
we will be out of stealth in the next couple of months. But for us, the focus really has been on understanding what's going on in video and pulling that information. So what we just heard about, the data. I think for us, we are trying to get rid of all unnecessary hardware for on set. So everything we're doing is out of camera. So if you think about putting CG character, whether it's a creature, a robot, or something, or changing the full environment, you're going in a full animation, we build it in a way that all you need is a camera. So a lot of things we build comes from robotics and self-driving cars. So the way it functions is, I always say, if you want to teach your robot how to make you a sandwich, first it needs to understand what a sandwich is. It needs to understand depth, how to come to that sandwich, and then it needs to understand the ingredients that you like.
Make a good sandwich.
You can make a good
There's
sandwich.
nothing sadder than a bad sandwich.
Right. So I think that's, base of of what we started building was just recognition out of image. So if a kid only has an iPhone and they can shoot, that they can recognize everything from, action, what's going on in the shot, to either framing of the camera, to, something called pose estimation, where it gets motion capture from the camera, to even lighting, right? And then the more we understand the image, the more we can manipulate it. Because that's really what, visual effects or CGI is, artists looking at the image and then looking at the reference and trying to make it look exactly like something that's real, right? So I think the beauty of AI is that, you can cut down all those expenses that a motion capture volume will take, or shooting clean plates after every shot, right? Or building a lot of assets that, are really, really heavy. So for us, the focus is on letting people that are not savvy and they don't know how to make characters or environments and just have one camera can make something, that's really, really, really complex right now. I think the whole pipeline, the way it is right now, especially in visual effects, is extremely complex. You need 5 to 10 different softwares that, are career driven. You need really to spend many years to learn how to use it. So for us, the focus is, having kids that have no clue how Unity or Unreal work, or how to use Flame or something similar, but they have a vision and they have a story and they have a camera. So this is, for me, the beauty of AI is that we do want to see more indie sci-fi. I think the beauty of it is that you'll have, right now we have big Marvel films. Obviously, I'm a fan of Marvel films, but I do think the studios will make a film that costs $200 million. They need $600 million to break even. So they can't really make an art film set in space or with robots, right? So for us, the way we see it is that, unfortunately young people don't watch indies as much as we would like to, right? Because it's really slow for them, right? But if you make it really visually interesting, then they'll watch it. So then you'll be able to have, big Marvel-like films that cost way less, right? And then you can make a more grounded film about,
Not that there's anything wrong with big budget movies.
Not at all. But I do think
like
there's still quite a gate in this industry, And obviously you don't want to say that at Foxlot, but there is still a socio-economical relations to storytelling. And for me, storytelling is art. And I don't think art should ever be tied, to where you live or how much money you're able to raise, right? And I'm not saying we're going to do this as a company, but I'm saying if we're 1% of what AI is going to do, and I really do believe AI is going to change this for the better, that's why we're doing it. Because I do think the point of technology is a tool to help us, right? You shouldn't put it center. It's a tool that's going to help these storytellers basically tell their visions. So if we can enable kids around the world to come closer, by doing this, even if they're just sitting at their computer, I think that's amazing.
That's beautiful. Rick, why don't we talk now about another part of the pipeline, content distribution. Can you give us a good example about how AI is supporting that?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, there's a lot going on with content distribution, obviously, and there are different platforms and different ways of getting content to people now. Um, AI can really help. It's a great accelerator, by the way, and all the things that you're hearing from Nikola, are perfect examples of that. AI is really accelerating things. Everybody's working right now on the content creation side. It's a good time in the industry. There's so much content coming in, and just to get it out fast enough, AI is an accelerator of these things. And then to get the content to people in the right way, we talked a little about recommender systems, but also in terms of content archives, for example. There's so much archived content, and a lot of it was archived before there was metadata. You heard Joel talk about finding content. So AI can help find content. So in the sports game, hey, when was the last time these two teams played in the playoffs? And it happened 30 years ago today, and it happens to be on 720p or 360p shot footage that was 18 FPS, and so you can pull content like that. You can upscale it with AI. You can so you can make it 4K. You can interpolate frames, so you can frame boost, so that you can actually do a slow-mo of what happened on that day 30 years ago. If it wasn't shot that way, you can denoise it. You can, just make it really look great on screen. And so it's a great way to be able to use all of those old content archives. So AI is also creating new opportunities that weren't possible before. And so that's one of the things is, content archives, distributing content in terms of auto formatting for a phone. So if someone's watching on their phone vertically, you may want to auto frame the subject so that it's always in frame instead of, off onto the side, right? Because it's just, cropping it the wrong way. So there's technology for that. So that's another good one. Recommender systems, and then even things like digital formats, ad insertion. So if you want to just automatically insert an ad based on location, based on, maybe there are promos and things like that going on, you can automatically insert things like that. You can do product replacement in video. You can also do things like translation and automatically lip syncing. So you can just get content into a region in a way that's relevant. The other thing that's really interesting about that is you can even do it in the person's voice. So you can translate the content, so auto dubbing effectively, but in the actor's voice, even though they don't speak that language. And you saw an example of that earlier with NVIDIA Maxine, which is really targeted more for video conferencing. But technology like that can, you can speak in your own voice in a different language. So there are so many cool things like that happening on the distribution side too.
That's great.
Are we-
Want to add to that?
I'm just gonna ask Rick, are we gonna solve the browsing issue on Netflix, like recommendations, so people won't go for 1 hour to look what they find? I was always so fascinating how those algorithms. I get it; it's really hard, but I'm fascinated how the streaming platforms still haven't really figured out the recommendation, but that's just me.
I think, again, over time, we're going to see vast improvement
Oh, yeah.
on all of this because it's always learning. Let's talk about another part of the pipeline, monetization. And we've hinted at ways this is going to save money, but I wondered if any of you had direct examples about content monetization and the role AI is playing in that. Anybody want to make a suggestion there?
Well, I think for us the main focus is cutting the cost, and I think as Rick said,
Of the making of it.
yeah, of the making of it. But I do think the making of it is, the production and post-production, if you cut down the cost. We've seen some solutions that cut it down by tenfold. I think in general, from indie filmmaking, producers always stayed away from visual effects because, the cost goes up so much. Even like rotoscoping, right? Which now with AI you can do automatically, but it's still not completely there. So I think the ugly side of visual effects that people don't really talk about is that you have companies, in India and in Asia that have people working 14, 16 hours a day. And we met these visual effects artists just doing manual labor on content that we watch every single day. So I do think cutting down the cost is really, really important. And that's what Rick said. It's all about speed. If you cut down the speed, you're going to cut down the cost. And if you cut down the need for a lot of equipment, you'll cut down the cost. So I think that's really, but for distribution as well, I think, you know, what Rick mentioned is all the streamers now are shooting for, you know, local but global, meaning they're making content in the country for that region, right? So I think that's really important for these algorithms to also help with proper distribution models of where you're going to plug your content automatically.
Jill?
Yeah, so monetization is definitely not my specialty, but you know where cloud comes into play is, let's go back to Lori's original comment about the scale of, you know, the global network of being able to directly deliver content into your region in their language, and you know be able to customize it to the individual. So it's not just recommending the right content, but you know, actually delivering it to you in a way that is the most meaningful for you. So the closer that you get to being your own distribution channel, obviously, the more money you take home. You know, you're cutting out the middle layer of telling your story. So you know, cloud in particular levels the playing field from, you know, the indie being able to get into the same spaces that the superhero film does. Because it's easier for you to create the content. It's now also easier and cheaper to deliver it to your audience.
I just wanted to mention, if you guys, and you all will probably have different ways of explaining this, but can you help us understand what a data center is? Because they're one of your sponsors here too, but also it comes up now in conversations all the time, and I know there's a lot of confusion about what that is, and it kind of feels overwhelming. So maybe
Yeah,
you can help.
so think of, you know, your tower workstation sitting under your desk where you're, you know, doing everything from your finances through game playing to, you know, maybe you're using that to do some local rendering. Now, flatten that out into, you know, a 19-inch wide pizza box, stuffed full of hardware. Now take a stack of those into a rack that's about 7 feet tall, and it's top to bottom chock full of CPUs and drives and computer boards and networking hardware and everything else. Then take, let's see how many, 40 rows of 20 machines. So you're in a room that's the size of a football field, wall to wall server racks. Some of them have, you know, huge storage arrays. Some of them are just networking gear. Some of them are just, you know, CPUs and GPUs, all in the same room, cranking on millions of different tasks for millions of different customers all at the same time.
It's not actually in the cloud, you're saying?
Well,
That is the
we've
cloud.
looked at, you know, having them at the bottom.
We've
of the
been
ocean.
tricked. We've been tricked by Microsoft. I always thought it was up in the air.
Well, so
Pulling
we call
stuff.
that Azure Orbital.
Okay, got it.
But there is also deep sea, so believe it or not, we can containerize a data center and drop it at the bottom of the ocean, and it solves all the cooling problems. But you know, so now you've got, you know, the room with 100,000 computers in it, and that's just one room. In a single data center location, you know, that's called a stamp, and then you'll have 8 of those. 32 megawatts worth of power that's needed to support that. Huge amount. Yeah, sorry, that's not a very good sustainability, but we do have. It's part of our mission statement of being carbon neutral. So it's all sustainable power. Like I went to our facility in Wyoming, and it's largely wind power generated, and you can see the wind farms, you know, outside of the data center that's actually doing that. Well, it's wind farms and nuclear missile silos. That's the securest data center in the world, protected by nuclear weapons in Cheyenne.
In case you were worried.
In case you're worried about it, your data is very secure. And so, you know, so we'll have 8 of those stamps. And then you go to another region, you know, so that's in Wyoming, then in Atlanta, there's another, you know, huge chunk of those data centers and those server colos. There's probably by now 150 or 200 of those around the world, all connected by multiple clusters of, you know, fiber optics that's, you know, giving you hundreds of gigabits per second of throughput. So, the cloud, apart from not actually floating in the air, it's the notion of distributed everything, access to everything. So, isn't there a movie, Everything All the Time?
Yes,
don't-
yes, everywhere. Good one.
Yeah. What's it?
Yeah,
With amazing visual effects.
yeah.
So if you've got the credit limit, you can have hundreds of data centers around the world all cranking on your problem at once, and that's how they do things like climate theory, genome projects, is because you are drawing on compute power from everywhere all at
It's
once.
not only M&E that's leveraging these data centers, but we're focused on that. Rick, did you want to add anything in about the data center story?
Well, just the importance of it, and NVIDIA is a company that thinks about solving some of the world's biggest challenges at the data center scale. And so the reason for that is because you have the ability to have infinite compute effectively. And so when you start interconnecting computers, data centers, you're really looking at a data center, and a bunch of them can be interconnected. So that becomes the new unit of compute. And when you start to think about not just being able to do something on your laptop or whatever's in your desktop system, you can really crack huge problems in the world now that you have this massive amount of compute. So everything from autonomous vehicles, lots of cases in healthcare, identifying, you can, a computer can now identify things like lung cancer and diabetes and different things like that with really effective, high efficacy, basically. And so, you can solve really big problems in our world of media and entertainment. It's being able to do anything, that you can think of at this point. We're looking into the future of virtual worlds now, where everyone's talking about the metaverse.
Say it. Metaverse. Okay, we don't have to say it again. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we're looking at these future of interconnected worlds. We're going to need data centers to be able to do that, but then also being able to project ourselves into those worlds, and then being able to use AI to do things like having different. There may even be AIs in the world, so characters. And solving a problem like creating an autonomous human inside of a virtual world is a lot. I mean, there's everything from, you saw that in the video at the beginning, there was our CEO, an animated version of him. Well, he's speaking in his own voice. It's not recorded. That's the AI has been trained on a domain, and it happens to be an expert in sustainability, as an example. And you can ask it questions, and then his face was using AI to automatically animate the mouth to the audio. And depending on how the audio is coming out, it can also change emotion on the face. And then it was also, you saw he was speaking and using his hands and that sort of stuff. All of that's using AI to automatically generate that animation as well. And so, and that's just, one level. And then if you think beyond that, so now does this digital human have to be able to remember the last conversation it had with you and pick up the conversation where you left off? Does it have to, so there are so many things, and it takes a lot of compute to be able to do that. And now imagine you have these virtual worlds we're all in, and all of this has to be computed at the same time. It's a big problem to solve, and that's why the cloud and these data centers are so important. It's really going to take us into the future where we can, and just to also say, we're using virtual worlds to help create a better physical world. So that's really important, because the way NVIDIA looks at it is, autonomous vehicles. So you want to train a car for, billions of different road conditions, different cities, different laws, different times of the day, different seasons, different surprises on the streets, kind of thing. And then you train it inside the virtual world before you transfer that knowledge to a real car. So again, using the virtual world to help create a better physical world.
Yeah, that's what
Simulating sustainability in buildings and
Yeah.
rotate a building, a digital twin of a building,
Yeah, so
3
digital
degrees,
twins
and
are the
how much heat can you recover? So there are lots of different things like that. Sorry,
Let me
Nikola.
bring back the conversation just because I want to just say to everybody, very soon we're going to open for Q&A. So if you have questions, get them lined up. But I just wanted to land one issue before we dig into the Q&A, and that is a lot of people hear AI and they hear jobs. Jobs are going away. And I feel like we've talked a lot about all the opportunities. So could you guys just even top level address that? Because there are so many great opportunities, but we have a lot of legacy producers who have worked in the traditional way. So in this merger of Hollywood and tech coming together, do you have any suggestions for folks about how to move through this?
I think it's really important to start conversations early and educate people. I've watched this speech. They talk about the trucking industry and how self-driving cars that's the first jobs that will go, right? And unfortunately, it hasn't been talked about a lot to educate some of these drivers of what they can do. I think from the entertainment industry standpoint and filmmaking in general, I think it will create a lot of new jobs, as we mentioned, but I think we're having a similar problem now with virtual production. We just spoke to a really talented production designer, and she talked about how the problem with visual effects and production designers, they never communicate. They have a vision, like if you took a Mandalorian, they'll do what visible on set, and then the VFX team will make what's on the screen. And I think that's a big problem. So they've been working a lot. They've actually been working with Epic Games, who is an investor of ours, about figuring out how to merge that gap between post-production and production. So I think it's going to be really similar with AI, and I think the solution is just to get people educated early on before the shift happens. And I think the shift will happen much quicker than people realize. So. For me, education is
I would just like
key.
to say that I am terrified of an autonomous 18-wheeler. I don't know if that's a great idea.
But as an example, the Producer Guild just did, a month or so of virtual production workshops, and I hope some of you got to go to them. Susan Zorman put them together. They were fantastic. But it was a chance to hear from people on the line what they're doing, how it's impacting their budget, and things like that. So there are so many great opportunities. It is just about education. Did you want to add to any of that?
Well, we have to remember that AI isn't, human level machine intelligence yet, and it's very narrow in a lot of the cases that we've been talking about. So yes, if it looks at your script and is able to give you an idea of whether or not this is going to be successful, or is able to break it down and give you a schedule, it's going to accelerate some of your decision making, but the decision making still needs to be done by you. And so you can take or leave it. So I'll give you an example in the art world. We're seeing AI creating art. And you probably saw that there was a painting sold at Christie's for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and everyone was like, oh no, like AI is creative and it's creating these paintings. Well, that AI was creating a new image every millisecond, and someone had to curate that one image that was able to sell for that. And so it has to be human guided, and then there are human tasks. So just because an AI can do things doesn't mean that it can do human-like things. And so I think there'll be some automation of a lot of things, and there has been, but humans still need to insert humanity into all of this process. So there are lots of decisions that need to be made by humans. AI is a collaborator.
Yeah, and just to close on that, I think that, academically speaking, there is a difference between artificial intelligence, everyone loves using that term, versus machine learning and expert systems. AI is more concerned, again, at the theoretical and the academic, anyway, this is my understanding of it, level of you are trying to put intelligence, self-change, it's not really self-awareness at this point, but where the thing can teach itself and it can adapt and do things, with a cognitive spin on it. But that's different than something that is learning to recognize images, because it's not thinking about it. It's going through algorithms. It's going through you know, curated sets of images that it's been, you know, trained on by a person. It's not a Terminator. It's not going to decide that yet that it's, it doesn't need us anymore.
So no
but
Arnold
there's,
Schwarzenegger is coming to my house to.
well, he might, but
Let's just open up to questions because I know we're running out of time. Yes.
I'm an archival producer of the production company, and I'm always searching for media. It could be anywhere in the world, and I'm wondering how universal you think this technology will be and how soon for people like me. And also, what about like historic media? Media that hasn't been put into the system yet, how do you see that kind of workflow getting there?
We've been seeing a lot of these. I mean, you can answer this better. We've been seeing a lot of these algorithms that really, really understand what you're seeing. Sometimes even better than humans. Adding to not replacing humans, right? But I think
well, except you couldn't have enough humans.
exactly,
to go
exactly.
and identify.
Yeah, because the age of information we're living in now, there's no way you can curate all the content.
But these engines are only as good as the person feeds what they want, right? So that's where your role would be.
Yeah, well, and obviously, digital indexing only works with digital content. So you asked about what about the stuff that predates, digital video. It has to come into that system at some point. If you have, what we call the metadata about it, so it's camera data and scene number and people on all that kind of stuff, then you can index a physical archive. So we can, like a Dewey Decimal System, it can at least tell you where to go to find it. But really what you want to do is take that physical media and process it and use the AI to improve it and identify what's in it. And then you have that instantaneous recall of, well, it's like, I think I know what I want. I'm just going to do a natural language search. And then as an archivist, it's way easier to do that. But it has to come into the cloud at some point.
Yeah, the other thing that for finding content that you can do with AI, and there are companies out there that already do this, is AI can automatically identify if there are people in the video, how many people, gender, age, ethnicity, sentiment analysis. It can also look in the content and identify that there are vehicles, cars, trucks, planes. It can also look at things like it can recognize specific faces if they're a celebrity. It can also do things like, for example, in advertising, instead of having people count how many times and how long the logos were on screen, an AI can just generate a report for you. So it's much quicker at that. And so basically what's going to happen is it's going to be easier and more motivating for people to just archive it into the system, because it's going to be cheaper and easier to, instead of having people metadata tag every single thing, you'll get richer data. It'll be faster to archive and it'll be faster to recall. So instead of spending your time doing that, you'll have more time to work with clients and work on growing the business, right? So there are different places where the emphasis on what a human is doing will be, but.
Let's do one more question back there, if you can get her mic. Him? Her? Yeah, her.
Him.
Sorry, I can't see.
Bright lights.
Check. Okay. I have a question about the future. I've been following the text-to-image diffusion models like DALL-E 2 and Google's Imagine, where you type in a phrase about, I want a Pomeranian dog in a doghouse made out of sushi, and poof, you get this really photorealistic image. It's amazing. And then, of course, virtual production. A lot of films now are using virtual worlds, essentially, or virtual environments, right? How far away are we from being able to say, like a scene that you want or a set, just to be able to issue a command and put in some mood boards and poof, you have the entire 3D environment to make a film in? I mean, is that coming?
Yes, it's coming. It's coming pretty fast. I think what is going to happen first is going to be mostly used by previs, because there's already text-to-video solutions out there. So just like DALL-E, but you're generating videos. But they're working on really small resolutions. You can upscale them. You can use something called super resolution to get it look. But I think it's still not as stable. You're still having a little, these generative models, these GAN models, just similar to what we see in deepfakes. It's basically very, very similar technology. They still can't get the pixel the way you need it for the final pixels. Like if you want 4K or 8K something to generate, it will get there. I think it's going to get there relatively quick. We're building something very similar for that for previs. I think what you said about mood boards is going to be really helpful. I think we're going to see a shift in pitching project. I think right now when you send to executives a project, a script or a Bible, they're busy. They don't have much time. They're going to look at it. But I've been seeing a lot of storytellers sending videos of just kind of, shot deck images of films they like. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of people writing stuff to generate what the feel and look and even some scenes of their project. And then executive can look at it and be like, okay, here's a 1-minute scene. It costs you nothing to make. It's not a final product. It can be, right? But it's going to help a lot more projects get made. But it is really, really fascinating the way it's moving. It's a bit scary as well. We were at a talk with people, and they were, talking about, is my job going away? As a production designer, if someone's just going to type what they want to see. It's still, I don't want to say random, but it's still very much like, you can't really get that human input of collaboration, iterations, if you're building a character or similar. So for us, it was really important not to do, because my co-founder is a young actor, and, we've been really fortunate to have, Spielberg on our advisory board and Joe Russo and funded by some companies that we really admire. And we've been really cautious on not replacing the artist. So the character creation, the environment creation, we kept untouched. We just focused on the production part, cutting down the cost. But it will be very interesting to see where it goes and how quickly it happens.
Right, you guys.
It's not Star Trek. It's not a holodeck.
Yeah, we're at time.
I just wanted to add to that
Yeah.
one. So we have a little pod over there in front of the theater, and you can come and see something called NVIDIA Canvas, and you can draw like a childlike sketch of a house, a mountain, some sky, and it'll fill it with photographic imagery. So yes, it's not quite there yet with photos. We position it more for concepting. In terms of 3D, though, we have something called NVIDIA Omniverse, and it has a deep search feature. So you can use natural language to find content. So if you were building a scene, you could just use natural language and say, give me a house, and you train it on your own data set. So you actually have to have the 3D models yourself. It's not going to generate them. But it can help find that content really quickly. Give me a house, mid-century modern, throw in some music. It'll, add some music from the time period. Give me 2 characters, and it'll throw some characters in there. But then you still have to go in and but it will help you build a scene faster with the content. And then the artist has to go in and do the art, right? The artist's job isn't to spend hours and hours searching for content. The artist's job is to add the artistry to the scene. So yeah, I think it's just, again, creating new opportunities, adding more to the creative part of the process rather than, the tedious task kind of stuff.
All right, unfortunately, we have to wrap, but there's so much great information that these guys have. So definitely go over and talk to Joel and Rick, who will be hanging out at the table until the event wraps. Check out Wonder Dynamics and what Nikola is doing. And definitely go online. Both Microsoft and NVIDIA have very robust sites that have case studies and training videos. Go online, take classes, use the PGA as a resource for you. I'm forever sitting in on sessions to learn more and keep up with this, because there really is a union happening between tech and storyteller. And so open yourself up to that concept, and don't be afraid of it. In fact, Rick gave me great advice to watch. Elon Musk had a great TED Talk a month ago where he talks about neural networks. So, be an active anthropologist and student in your own education. It is never too late to take all of this on. Coming up next in this room is how to climb the production ladder. So stick around if you're interested in that topic. And let's have a big hand for our panelists. Oh my God. And go check them out outside. Thanks to everybody, and thanks Produced by and the PGA for having the foresight to put such a great topic together.